I was just finishing a beautiful retreat here in Finland, where we did, in the end, the practice of inner Chöd, which includes visualization where we dissolve the aggregates one by one as self-offering in the process of realization. And it has such a profound symbolism in it, this specific practice, when it is understood and applied experientially. So in this video, I will speak about the aggregates a little bit and how does that relate to the realization of non-duality and the realization of no self and emptiness. So the aggregates is a concept originating from Buddhist tradition, and it's a way of mapping out our experience. So everything we experience happens through the functioning of the five skandhas or aggregates. So form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. So form refers here not only our physical form, although that is a kind of a root attachment. So grasping on our physical form as a source of identity. So it's a form of self-grasping when there is this type of identification with physical form or kind of ownership, I guess, regarding the physical form of our experience, the sensations, and the embodied experience. So it's not only that, but it's anything in the experience that appears as a fixed, solid form, like form as something that actually exists, right? So when we have the non-dual realization, we see clearly and we sense clearly that form is formlessness. So form is nothing other than formlessness. So what appears as a physical form with boundaries, solidity, materiality, right? Like physicality, that appears like an object is actually not an object at all, that there's nothing graspable there. We can't find boundaries in the sense experience at all. We can't find center for any sensation. We are not able to objectify anything when there is no subject, no perceiver, no observer. So when that fundamental dichotomy collapses, that is the realization of formlessness, and it's a deep realization, like it's the deep end of non-duality. So when we offer our physical form as an offering, like we dissolve the aggregate of the form as an offering, it's a kind of symbolic gesture that we are willing to let go of the self-grasping in regards to this aggregate. And the second aggregate is called feeling or Vedana. And so it's not an emotion, right? So its feeling is something very instinctual, immediate, visceral. You could say it's a kind of mammal response that makes it that certain sensations appear as pleasurable or unpleasant or neutral. So in a way, it's very intimate, right? It's very personal. So let's say that there's the sudden penetrating, intense sound. And, if we have sensorial sensitivity, it may appear very harsh. It may appear super intense, especially if we are going through this transition to non-duality, right, where the filters and buffers are dropping away, and the sense experience is becoming increasingly unfiltered. So whatever the sensorial stimulus is, it either appears as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's the, you could say, conventional way of perceiving. But in my experience, that starts to shift when we undergo a non-dual realization. So yeah, certain sensations may appear very intense due to the bare nature of sense experience, and that there's no more kind of protective shields, dissociations, like mental defenses that are making us kind of disconnect from our direct sense experience. So when none of that is there, certain sensations can appear in their intensity as just immediately like unpleasant, right? That normally wouldn't really register at all, or would perhaps register as neutral. And yeah, like in a conventional way, there are certain sensations that appear less pleasurable. Like let's say you have your morning cup of coffee in the way you want it to have, and there's this immediate sense of pleasantness about it. So these kind of things, they start to shift because usually we have a very conditioned way of perceiving certain sense experiences pleasurable and desirable. So like we have a very specific way, for example, we want our morning tea or morning coffee, and then it creates this sense of pleasure. But you may notice going through the awakening process that at some point it becomes kind of hard to differentiate anymore. Like why would this be more pleasurable than anything else, really? Like it appeared very pleasurable, the morning coffee, because we gave it a lot of meaning, that it was something specific for us, like that we like to eat certain things in the morning or drink certain things in the morning, or other type of sensorial experiences that we prefer, like I prefer to go for a walk and experience fresh wind, and some other person would be like, oh no, I don't like the wind, it's very unpleasant. So we have these preferences that appear kind of natural, but through the awakening process, we may notice that actually none of these sensations are inherently pleasurable or unpleasant. Like it's just sense data. And this distinction starts to kind of dissolve. So yeah, that's just something to be aware of. So when the self-grasping regarding this aggregate, Vedana, of feeling, it starts to loosen up or releases completely, then there's no more sense that we need to somehow protect ourselves when intense sensorial stimulus arises. Because now this immediate visceral response, like pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, it's just sensorial data. It's just an arising and passing. It doesn't happen to anyone. There's no target receiving the intensity if it contains intensity. So there's no need to protect ourselves from this type of intense sensations, and there's no need to anymore cultivate specific kind of sensations that we consider pleasurable, and avoid certain kind of sensations that we consider that we prefer not to experience. For example, I don't like to experience direct sunlight. That could be my preference, but is it actually so? Like, is there something inherently unpleasant in that intensity of direct sunlight on me, for example? So it's actually like a deep freedom that becomes available when there is no any more sense of self about that immediate visceral kind of biological sense response to environment like that. Okay, so then the third aggregate is called perception or sana. And it refers to this capacity to organize experience in a very fundamental manner. So if we have this totally undifferentiated sense data, like quantum data, that we are able to at all perceive it as something, through labels, that's perception. So it's basically referring to this quality of organizing experience through labeling, that this is this, it's not that, and so on, whatever it is that we perceive. And in the conventional mode of being, it happens so automatically that we don't really have access to the so-called direct reality prior to labeling most of the time. Like the labeling happens, and after that, the next aggregate, Shankara, like the fabrication, starts to happen. So that's something that changes quite a bit during the awakening process. So this labeling actually just doesn't happen anymore when it's not necessarily. So it's totally possible to live most of your day without that kind of conceptualization going on regarding the sense data. So there is just this pure, unmediated, fresh, immediate experiencing, like without self, without other, without labeling, without conceptualization, without filters, which is so, beautiful. This immaculate, spontaneously self-refreshing nature of the sense experience, where there is just this arising, liberation upon arising, like, because there's no grasping happening at all, no self-grasping happening at all. So in the conventional or normal, what we could call normal mode, it's completely, could say, covered, this purity, this immediacy, this vividness, this clarity of the sense experience, because the perception aggregates kicks in and starts to label, oh, it's raining, it's bad weather. And then like Vedana, unpleasant feeling, rain, I don't like this, like preference. And then, oh my God, this day will be a bad day because it's bad weather, fabrication. So I'm just making a silly example, but something like that. So that doesn't really happen when you go through awakening process. There's no need to perceive reality through conceptualization. Like this type of labeling only appears when it's needed, like when we need to look into certain aspects of our experience or engage in a certain kind of inquiry or shadow work or communicate certain things to another person. So yeah, then we have access to labeling. It just happens. And it's somehow very spontaneous without doership. So there's no sense of self about it. We also see that it's very empty, that whenever we give a term to something, we give a name for it, we already see the limitation of it. So it's very clear the empty nature of this aggregate, but it still functions, of course, in our experience. But it's very different when there is this freedom, like from the constant grasping, around labeling and kind of identifying as the perceiver in that type of way. So that's also part of the non-dual realization, right? The seventh fetter, to kind of see through the illusion of the perceiver in this way. So that really collapses a fundamental dualistic filter there. Okay, and then the fourth aggregate, Shankara, so that's translated as mental formations. So that's the one that is most discussed in non-duality in regards to the narrative self, because it encompasses like quite a lot. So it's all the meaning making, all the interpretations. So basically everything we start to fabricate after there is this immediate visual response, like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then labeling, and then interpreting like what's happening. And the interpretation comes with a feeling. So that's also part of the fabrication, part of Shankara, that there are these emotions that appear. And then there is the volition and the apparent choice regarding the volition, like how we choose one interpretation over another. So all of this is very much part of the narrative self. And there's a sense of doership about it when there is strong identification with this particular aggregate. So when there is sense of self about it, it appears as if you choose one interpretation over another, or you choose to engage in non-dual practice, for example, and question all interpretations. But there's still a sense of self about it, like that you are still in relationship with this aggregate. So all of that's part of the narrative self, of course, and how we have these conventional ways of interpreting our experience, and then we are introduced to spiritual interpretations and views and strategies and perspectives, which of course are also fabrication. They are also the functioning of the mental formations of Shankara. But if they are used in a skillful way, then they destroy the already existing interpretations, right? So we use this type of views or concepts in a way that destroys concepts in the process of awakening. And that's super important to kind of grasp. So we are not adding more interpretations and more meaning making on top of the ones that are already there and leaving those unexamined and unquestioned. So a lot of the inquiry, a lot of the shadow work, a lot of the non-dual examination, it happens somehow in the domain of this aggregate. And it's a very liberating, of course, when the identification starts to release here, that there's no more such a strong self-grasping on this aggregate. Like there's no more sense of me about all of that going on. And there's the capacity to see the empty nature of interpretations, right? That all interpretations are limitations in a way. They are not the truth, like the ultimate truth ever, including all the spiritual views and interpretations. So the ultimate truth can never be articulated, can never be spoken, can only be pointed towards by concepts, but those concepts are themselves just concepts, so just fabrication. So yeah, in regards to non-dual realization and no self-realization, it is super important to have this twofold realization of emptiness in regards to this aggregate for this insight to be really clear. So you want to see that there is no self in this type of meaning making, in these interpretations, in the exercise of the volition, in the choice. So you want to very clearly see that there is no self in it. There's no self exercising it. There is no self that it refers to or that it belongs to, this aggregate. So there's no ownership. There is no self behind it. There is also no self that is transcending it, like somehow beyond it, beyond interpretations, and so on. So that's the first insight. And the second is the empty nature of all interpretations and all meaning making. So we see that they don't have very inherent reality, but they are also, we don't also deny their apparent reality, right? So we kind of see the interconnected nature of all concepts, all meanings. So we see that they are nothing fixed. We see that they dependently arise. So we start to access this kind of creative nature of fabrication, which becomes more and more available when the no-self insight clarifies. So this capacity to spontaneously, you could say, organize reality in a way that is liberating, empowering, in a way that is unbinding the experience, in a way that it doesn't fix us to a specific interpretation and increase mind identification and grasping on emotions, but we are able to kind of play with this capacity of fabrication in a creative manner. And we see in our direct experience if the result is liberating, if self-liberation starts to spontaneously occur, like a natural release. So that's a sign that we're using these type of spiritual views and concepts in a way that unbinds conceptualization, that destroys, you could say, attachment to this aggregate. Okay, and then the fifth aggregate is called consciousness, Vijnana, and that's very interesting, and very specific to Buddhism, that consciousness is not the ultimate reality. Consciousness is one of the aggregates. Because what usually starts to happen when we disidentify from the narrative self, which largely deals with the mental formations, then we identify with consciousness, which is kind of like a pure reflection instead of this very complex and constructed and fabricated and changeable self, that is created by the mental formations. So consciousness as an aggregate appears something much more permanent, but in this view, it's not. It's also something that actually comes and goes. Like in deep sleep, there's no consciousness in this type of way that this word is used in this context. So consciousness refers to consciousness of something. Okay, so it's dualistic and it's also karmically conditioned, the way this aggregate functions. So always when we have a sense that there is consciousness of something, even if the experience is super subtle, very, very spacious, very, very boundless, very open, there's almost no thoughts. But as long as there's still a sense of a knower, like perceiver, observer, that is aware of the boundlessness, of the openness, of the absence of thoughts. So yeah, that's the consciousness aggregate. So that also needs to be deconstructed in this view, like dissolved, the identification, the self-grasping regarding this, you could say, pure reflection. And pointing out the difference between consciousness and our true nature, which in Dzogchen it's called Rigpa. So, and sometimes Rigpa is being pointed out with the term awareness. So it's kind of like one of the main challenges in those teachings is to point out the difference, like experientially and skillfully, between consciousness and awareness. So awareness in this context would be non-dual. So this is pure non-duality, like awareness as something inherent to appearance in itself. So it's not awareness of appearance. There's just this pure non-dual arising, this self-illumination. So the Rigpa is the self-knowing clarity. So Rigpa is not consciousness. So if we are attempting to be aware of Rigpa, that is not Rigpa, because that's consciousness still operating there. Like we cannot be aware of Rigpa. Rigpa is the spontaneous, self-cognizant clarity. And that's why these type of teachings are pointing out as an instruction to stop trying to be aware of anything, stop trying to make anything happen, stop all the effort, just relax, rest in the, could say, open, uncontrived nature of the presence, because this is already there, right? So we stop all doing. We release the goal. So if we have a goal of recognition, that's only going to be hindrance in this view. So these are just some of the practical instructions for this type of non-meditation, which kind of cultivates conditions for this self-cognizant clarity to kind of spontaneously become more and more self-evident in the experience, because it's already there, but obscured by this activity of the aggregates. And one of the kind of most subtle obscuration is exactly the aggregate of consciousness, because it can imitate so skillfully Rigpa. Like it can take these forms of spiritual experiences that are very expansive and very spacious and quite extraordinary. And there can be these experiences of clarity and vividness and a sense that, oh, this must be it, this must be awakening, this must be Rigpa. And it's often very hard to get through as a teacher to students when they are in this phase of the practice, to kind of point out this last veil that can still be there, because oftentimes it connects, of course, with genuine flashes of Rigpa, like that has occurred, the initiatory event, and of course it's repeating itself many, many times, not necessarily being consciously attended like throughout the day, but the Rigpa is always here. But when we consciously engage on this type of practice, what can easily happen that we enter in meditation in states of consciousness or meditative states, imagining that's it, and we're still kind of operating within the field of aggregate of consciousness. So that needs to be shattered. So there needs to be this breakthrough into the unconditioned, immaculate nature of the self-cognizant clarity. So that's the unconditioned by karma. And it has this kind of otherworldly freshness and purity to it. So in consciousness, there is still continuity. There is still a sense of time. And Rigpa is timeless. There is no continuity whatsoever in a conventional sense, like as a duration. So when Rigpa becomes very, very clear, we can't really locate the beginning of it. Like when did the initiatory event, it introduces us to our true nature, but when it becomes very, very clear and all-encompassing and undistracted, that recognition is beginningless, it's endless, it's primordially present. It's not something that actually happened in time and then it has been present ever since. So all of that just, it seemed to be like fabrication. So when we dissolve this aggregate of consciousness as an offering, for example, in Chöd, it's a very deep gesture. Like we kind of acknowledge that there is no self in this aggregate. And we kind of offer our interior world and all our spiritual experiences as an offering. We dissolve them with this aggregate. Because without this aggregate, there is no interiority. There is no inner sense of subjectivity. There's no sense of past. There's no capacity to accumulate experiences and carry them within. So all of that goes. So as you can see, all of these aggregates are very much part of the non-dual realization and no self-realization, right? But yeah, this is maybe the most subtle one and elusive one, like this distinction between consciousness and awareness. in this sense that I'm using these terms now in this video, to discuss the aggregates in connection with no self-realization. So when we see that there's no self in consciousness, of course, it still remains available, right? The aggregate still functions. It's just kind of like a pure reflection that is available when needed. So in the same way, like the capacity to label and organize experience is available when needed, also this capacity for pure reflection is available when needed. So the aggregates, they don't disappear. They are just seen to be empty, like twofold empty of self, and then empty as in sunyata, this very, very deep insight that has the capacity of endless deepening and clarification and refinement.